Okay, so today, Ben, could you just start off by telling us quickly who you are, and basically what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Ben. I originally have served in the Royal Air Force. I've got degrees in sports science and I'm doing a medical based degree and leadership and management degree at the present time, at this minute in time. Got a couple of other degrees as well in personal training and things like that. And basically, I've had a very niche interest in aviation, dating back up throughout history and also experimental aircraft as well. And also on top of that, I have a background in researching what is very mainstream at the moment. It appears is UFOs, aka UAPs. Obviously, UFOs are the old school side of things, standing for unidentified flying objects. The more modern term, which is unidentified aerial phenomena, is a more modern day version of that. And I've been interested in that since the age of about 5, when I personally saw my very own UFO, and that's what got me interested. And I also have a background in studying ancient history, and I love astronomy as well.
Okay, Ben, just a question at this point.
Yep.
Could you explain to us why you think, explain what your take is on why, in general, there's been a move away from calling unidentified objects as they were called UFOs.
Yeah.
Why do you think we moved away from UFOs to UAPs?
So it's not what I think; it's what the American government have done. Basically, there's a doctor by the name of Dr. Stephen Greer. He is a doctor of emergency department, and he's very famous and well known within the UFO circles. He's done multiple briefs for the American government, and basically, what happened was he came up with the term UAPs. Because UFOs, there's a lot of what I like to call B movie kind of establishment sort of thing. There's like people in the media, whenever you see it on the news, people mentioning UFOs, they automatically turn around and go, little green men, and also laugh about it and make light of it. And the reason for that was because back in the sort of 1940s, 50s, 60s, the Central Intelligence Agency were very keen to sort of steer away from sort of the subject matter, and that they attached basically a laughability factor to the word of UFOs and tried to play it all down. Now, in modern day, obviously, we now know. As of 2017, when the American Pentagon released images showing an incident that happened in 2004, and they've actually come clean and said, yes, this was real footage of what actually happened. The term UAP was attached to that then to steer away from the laughability factor of UFOs.
Yeah, okay. And then you're now going to delve back into history,
Yes. Yeah.
from the early beginnings of this phenomena,
Yeah.
and what evidence there was to support this.
Yeah. So a lot of people believe that UFOs in the modern day era started on the so-called Roswell incident in 1947, whereby everybody knows the story. A UFO allegedly crashed on a ranch just on the outskirts of the Mexican desert sort of area, where it was not too far away from the only nuclear bomb group of the USA Air Force. Sort of, these are the elite of the elite sort of thing. And obviously, we all know the story of that. What people probably don't realise is that the UFO phenomenon has been going around for centuries. In fact, there's modern artwork, or should I say ancient artwork, that actually depicts UFO footage. So, for example, if you go to sort of Arizona, the Hopi Indian tribes and that sort of area, you'll see rock art actually depicting what can only look like, beings from another planet, and basically they look as though they're not part of Earth at all. They've got the typical sort of alien pictures that you see on cult movies and in TV with the slanted eyes and the big helmets and things of that nature. This is not also in America. This has also been shown in Australia and the Aboriginal culture. It's also been shown in the Maori culture in New Zealand. It's also been shown in Aztec, Mayan, and all the ancient cultures around the world. They all have connectivity of stories of whereby people have come from the stars, from above, and basically taught them about agriculture, about science, math, astronomy, and they've documented this. In fact, very famously, if you go to the London Museum right now, there is the clay tablets from Sumerian times, and they call it the King's List. Okay, and the picture that it paints is basically of stories of um, basically two brothers. One was called Enki, and the other one I can't remember his name, but I'm sure somebody on YouTube will be able to correct me. And basically, they tell of stories about how these kings, you know, lived for 36,000 years, and basically went all over the world and sort of came in craft from the stars and that sort of thing. And this has been documented in clay tablets. Now, going through the ancient sort of time period, the way people use words and to describe these events was very limited. So they would use words and attach words what they knew within their vocabulary. So, for example, one of the famous stories is of the Bible and Enkiel, basically, sorry, not Enkiel, Ezekiel, and that was in one of the stories of the Bible that has been banned by the Vatican. Okay, and this is only worshipped in the country of Ethiopia. And one of the stories it says is that a craft of some description landed. It was a wheel within a wheel, and what happened was it took this person on board, and he said that he saw clouds from the other side. Well, if you think about that from a logical modern day perspective, that sounds very much to me like he was taken aboard a craft and basically taken up into the sky where he saw Earth from the other side. You know, so could you say that is an alien kidnapping potentially? But the story is documented within this version of the Bible.
Just a quick question: is that the Book of Enoch?
That's right, the Book of Enoch. Yeah,
which is banned.
It
by
is.
The Vatican.
Yeah, the Vatican don't actually recognise it, and basically, like I said, the country of Ethiopia still do recognise it and still use it. And it's the only country in the world that does. So that says itself asks potential questions of why does the Vatican not, recognise it? It seems very strange that in the Western culture that this is not looked upon, and yet the one country that isn't part of Western culture does. So that in itself presents a question. And then also, going back further still, there's been pictures depicted in Mayan and Aztec times, and of if you go to I think it's in Mexico, where there is a one of the pyramids of Mexico actually shows what can only be described as an astronaut in some sort of contraption. Now a lot of people say, oh well, this ancient alien theory. It has to be. But again, back in the day when this was actually sort of manifested and made, there was no such thing as the word alien. Again, it was how do you describe an alien back then? So these things, they used what was best attached to their vocabulary at the time. So another example would be in Roman times, there was stories that's been documented of flying shields with fire. That again, is a vocabulary what was best attached to them. Another one was in ancient China, flying dragons, silver dragons in the sky, spitting fire. Again, it's a vocabulary. Again, does that not sound like the flying craft that we see currently at the moment in modern day times? Again, the questions have to be asked. Also, if you go into art and ancient art of sort of the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, and that sort of period, there's a very famous picture. I think it's in the Louvre in Paris, or one of the art museums of Europe, of Mary Magdalene, what can only be described as some sort of UFO probe, and that is easily spotted on Google. Just put in UFO pictures of art, in art. And again, there's been multiple pictures of UFOs. There's one very famous one again with Mary in the forefront, but in the background you've got what appears to be a silver shield flying down into the ground. You know, like a yellow beam of some description.
Yeah.
Then obviously with it being fairly near Christmas, again the story of the three wise men. What were they following? You know, they were actually saying that they were following the Star of Bethlehem, which apparently in modern scientists will tell you, you know, oh, it was the planet Venus. Well, okay, fine, but there's a question there. Why was planet Venus moving when they moved, and when they stopped, it stopped? And why did it shine a yellow light onto the barn where Jesus Christ is supposed to have been born? That, to me, again, asks questions. And another question will be of the Bible is that, you know, we hear about the story of the floods, you know, and Noah. Now, okay, in modern day science, you know, is it possible for two by two animals to be on one single boat? Well, no, it's not. Well, actually, if you ask it from another perspective, it is. If you look at it from a genetic perspective, you know, and having genotypes bottled and female and male genotypes of each animal stored in what can only be described as a library, you know. So there is a lot of evidence now showing that, you know, there is genetics within ancient times, you know, especially if you look at the genes of the human species in gene number 2, you know, that scientists are now saying that gene number 2 technically shouldn't be existing, yet there it is for the plain to see, you know. Why is it that that was being able to be fused, you know? So there's a lot of history that we're not being told about the human species itself, and there's also a lot of stuff that we're not being told in ancient times about how UFOs have actually encroached on our whole sort of human development. I mean, it is to say that religion itself could be derived from UFO lore, you know. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that at the moment. Basically, if you look at, say, for example, the Christian religion and the Judaism and Hinduism, they've all got stories of you know, UFOs within the religion themselves. So yeah, it's something that's questions needs to be asked of ancient times and where UFOs actually fit into all of that.
Yeah, because that in those times, within the context of what they knew,
Mm-hmm.
they would presumably not be able to conceive of these contraptions, these
That's
flying
right.
machines as we know them,
Yeah.
because it just didn't exist at that time.
No. No. Exactly. You know, there's a lot of um, stories out there of ancient UFOs being described, not just through ancient sort of China and Japan and all that, but also look at the what was the name of the culture? The Aboriginal culture. They have a famous thing to become a man about going about walkabout and basically understanding their surroundings. Well, if you look at the culture of the Aboriginal people, they talk about how a person from the stars came down to teach them all about understanding themselves and how to farm. You know, also there's a one in Africa, the tribe, the Dogma tribe, and basically they knew. In fact, it's a very famous story. There was I think it was in the 1930s and 40s. There was an archaeologist who spent 10 years with the Dogon tribe, and basically he spent 10 years with them because the heads of the tribe didn't trust him at the start, and he built the trust up to such an extent whereby what happened was he told the heads of the tribe told them stories about how they knew about the dog star and how it had two stars, 3 stars, and it was tri-stars, and it had 2 planets. Well, fairly recently, in the last decade or so, they've actually discovered that that is the case. You know, that these stars do exist, that it has a 2 planetary system, and that basically, you know, it's they're asking questions is how is it the Dogon tribe knew this, you know, and have known this for generations, you know, spanning back hundreds of years, you know, and and the archaeology said that it's the mainstay of their culture is understanding astronomy, you know, and understanding the stars. And they say that basically these people came from the stars, supposedly in the constellation of Orion and around that sort of area, to teach them about what life was about and how it was created, you know. And again, it will be. You know, there'll be people out there in sort of internet land, as it were, that may be able to correct me on certain aspects of that story. But that is the main gist of that story of how ancient people have been told over centuries of how, you know, people from the stars have come down to actually sort of teach them all this information.
On that theme, Ben,
Mm-hmm.
what would be your take on the Anunnaki? So that was based as what we now know as modern day Iraq.
In modern day Iraq, yeah, Mesopotamia and around that sort of neck of the woods. Again, this has got leads back to the King's List in the London Museum at the moment. There's a lot of information in the London Museum about this. So in the Anunnaki, the story goes that there were two brothers that genetically manipulated the human species. That they lived for thousands of years. There was multiple kings, and that they travelled the world and they were in search of gold. Because apparently, according to the story, again, this is not made up. This has been documented in clay tablets that can be seen in the London Museum, saying basically they were mining gold for the home planet because for the home planet the atmosphere was degrading, and they were using gold to actually, you know, fix their home planet. This the planet is supposedly called Nibiru. Okay, now that's a story. Okay, whether it's true or not is again open to conjecture. However, one thing I will say about the Anunnaki is there are some interesting questions to be asked. They've all got they themselves have got a story of a flood. They've also got the fact that they're all giants. Also, it was in the Bible. Now, again, the Bible did kind of pick and choose stories from that time period. You know, these were called the Watchers. In fact, it's actually also stories of the same sort of Mesopotamian stories are actually also in not only the Christianity Bible but also in Islam. They call it the Jinn, and basically they talk about how they sort of create problems, as it were, and that basically again they can link it back to Mesopotamia and the stories of these clay tablets. You know, they say they came in flying vehicles as well, but again it can be linked to Hindu. That if you look at Indian literature, they talk about something called a Vimana. Again, these are flying vehicles. And again, there's a connection between the Hindu stories and those stories of Mesopotamia. So how is it these ancient populace were able to have the same stories, yet supposedly they were kept apart by thousands of miles of ocean? I mean, there was one story, for example, there's an ancient island in the South Pacific, you know, whereby volcanic rock was actually built by a king, and the story goes that these volcanic rocks were floated into position. Well, the same stories were actually in the Anunnaki, how they built these great pyramids by floating these stones and rocks into position. Well, that seems quite sort of technological, if you ask me. And, you know, was technology like that around at the time? You know, do we actually know? Well, if you go to ancient Egypt, you know, I've got a lot of questions about the information we've been told by the ancient Egyptian sort of narrative. For example, the Great Pyramid. I don't know if you've ever visited the Great Pyramid, but if you go to the Great Pyramid of Giza, there is absolutely no writings on the wall. There's one stone sarcophagi that was basically far too big for a human being. This thing was multiple tons. It's right up in the higher parts, echelons of the pyramid. How on earth did they get that 6, 7, 8 ton sarcophagi in? Also, it's recently been discovered, I think it was in 2018-19 time period, all the pyramids are actually built on top of a water area. Underneath the pyramids, there's water being found and discovered, as well as mercury. you know, and basically that in itself, if you look at it from a scientific perspective, that is the makings with, if you look at the stones as well, which have got quartz crystal in it, from the pyramids and what they were made out of, that's the makings of a battery. And people don't realise that they did have batteries back then. There's one very famous case of the Baghdad battery, you know, and that was able to generate, albeit a small amount of volts, through the use of clay and the use of acid made from wine and vinegar, you know. So, and there's pictures of that in ancient Egypt and also in ancient Mesopotamia, of them using what can only look like as a light bulb.
Just one thing I want to go on to.
Go on.
The narrative of the Anunnaki, so correct me if I'm wrong, would be that what we now know as Baghdad.
Yes, Baghdad, that's right.
This was the concentration, the epicenter of where mathematics evolved from.
Yes, yeah.
It was exclusively from that area,
Yeah.
which would be consistent, I believe, if it's true that the Anunnaki had arrived there and created the hybrid and conveyed
Well, there is
their technology to these people.
there is. However, is there an argument that mathematics did actually set up in Mesopotamia? So, if you study Norse mythology and Viking mythology, everybody knows quite a lot about that, especially from the films of Thor and things like that. Okay, and they talk about the Rainbow Bridge now, and going over to Valhalla and the other side. Okay, well, Einstein, if you look at his theoretics on theory of relativity, he talks about also Einstein-Rosen bridge, which is the bending of space-time, and the warping of space-time to create a shortcut through space. Well, if you look at Norse mythology, okay, the passing over of the Rainbow Bridge, that, okay, is very similar to what Einstein was actually talking about, you know. And also recently, everybody believes that the Americas was discovered by Columbus in the 1400s. Okay, it wasn't. They've actually found Viking enclaves in Canada recently. So the question is, how did the Vikings navigate, you know, from Norway to Great Britain to Iceland to Greenland to Canada? Yeah, and they've recently discovered that the Vikings were very good navigators because of their knowledge of mathematics. You know, also I go back to the Dogon tribe. The Dogon tribe have a massive knowledge of mathematics and astronomy. The Aztecs, the Mayans, famously the long count calendar. You know, 2012, there's this big thing about the calendar sort of ending and the end of the world. Reality was it was just moving on to a new calendar, you know. And again, they knew quite a lot about mathematics. So there is a question there of why did all these ancient people know so much about mathematics? Yes, there is a argument to be had in regards that Mesopotamia did indeed have extensive knowledge of mathematics, but if you look around the world, there's other cultures out there as well in themselves that also had extensive knowledge of mathematics. So where did that all come from? Where did it stem from? You know, and that's an interesting question to sort of look at.
Just one quick question there. Were the Viking, the knowledge of the Vikings, did the Anunnaki predate?
Yes.
And somehow it had percolated its way over there to the Vikings.
Funny enough, the Anunnaki, there's a story about how, I think it's Enlil, I pronounced his name correctly there. Apologies to those that are watching if they know about this subject a little bit, if I've sort of screwed the name up a little bit there. But basically, there's a story within these tablets to say that he travelled the world. You know, he travelled to different sort of cultures. And if you look at all these ancient cultures around the world, they've all got the same name, you know, for certain characters within their cultures. For example, Ra, the sun god. Yeah. Okay. Well, basically, when we go, we talk about the sun god, we say his actual name was Amun Ra. Yeah. So when we say a prayer, you know, we're actually thanking the sun god because we say Amen at the end of the prayer. Yeah. So, you know, and the Viking culture have the name for their sun god. the Roman culture they have, the Greeks had theirs, the Mayans, the Aztecs, they all have the same, roughly the same translation for the sun god. So that's got to have stemmed from you know, that kind of culture and Mesopotamia. It must have done, because you know, how is it all these cultures have the same name for one character? It seems only plausible that the Anunnaki sort of went out into the world and actually presented all this information.
So to conclude on that, the
Yeah.
Anunnaki, Mesopotamia at the time, Baghdad as we know it
Yeah.
now, that would have been the epicenter at the time.
There's a lot of sort of research now to suggest that. That's all I'll say on the matter. I don't know enough about that whether to conclusively turn around and say yes, absolutely. But what I can say is there's a lot of evidence to show that, strong evidence to show that that is the case. Yes.
Yeah.